Hey everyone, welcome back to One Piece Paneling Dojo, the show where we talk about the paneling, composition, and visual storytelling of new One Piece chapters. Today we are going to be talking about chapter 1094, but we're also going to be talking just a tiny bit about Evangelion. You'll have to go to the end of the video to see why. The part of this chapter I really wanted to highlight is the sequence of Bonnie dodging and running away from all of the Marines. There's a lot of cool tricks being used here to make it stand out visually. To start with, we open with a panel ellipsis because, as usual, we use that kind of visual language to tell the reader that we're going from a different location to here. Now, we established to start with that she's looking to the left, and that kind of left-right layout is going to be very present here as it has been in some of the prior chapters, but we're also using that immediately for the reversal of her flipping around. She's looking left and towards the reader, and now she's looking right and away from the reader, and that kind of flip just matches the fact that she is literally spun around in world. And of course, the direction she's moving in here matches the direction that her eye is moving in. Now, the final thing that's cool here is something we've talked about a lot in the last few chapters too. The order of elements in the panel conveys something about which happens first. A lot of the time, we have someone dodge something and then see the impact, and that tells us that the character who dodged is moving a lot faster. Here, we see the impact before we see Bonnie. And what that tells us is that this is something she barely dodged, that it was just happening and she just managed to avoid it. Now, as our eye goes down to this panel, it's always worth mentioning how Oda makes sure to use the full shape of the panel. If he's going to draw a horizontal panel, he's going to use the full length of it for her arm. And of course, as her eye goes down with her arm, it is matching the motion of her arm as she pulls her gun out, and it directs us all the way to the next panel. Now, as our eye goes down to the final panel of this page, it once again moves in the direction Bonnie is moving. And something that's worth mentioning, though I think I've referred to it before, is the fact that you don't universally go from right to left with motion in manga. Instead, you follow a reverse Z layout. In a Western comic, it would just be a Z layout, but it's reversed from that. So if our eye is traveling down from one row of panels to the other, then having the character move to the right actually fits the way our eye is moving rather than going against it. And so as our eye travels down here, it then goes down with Bonnie's leg and with the direction of the bullets she's firing. And I think this is just a really cool shot as we see her going in one direction then shooting in the other. We even have the fact that she's sort of flipping around conveyed because we have these cloud effects that are essentially a speed line for her motion. So as we look through here, we feel very easily how she's flipped around, even though the last shot was something very tight that didn't show her full body. Now, the final thing that I think is really cool about this page is how we use the left-right positions. In a lot of fights, as we've talked about in prior videos, we want to keep the attacker on the right and the person they're attacking on the left, for a lot of reasons. But something cool here is that we keep going back and forth. First Bonnie is on the right, then she's on the left and someone is attacking her from the right. Then as we go down, she goes back to the right and is attacking people who are to her left. And this back and forth conveys the feeling that Bonnie is weaving around all the enemies. I mean, very literally, she's being attacked from behind in this sequence. So it conveys the feeling of being surrounded, of being attacked from all angles at once and constantly having to dodge through them. And that's actually paid off on here on the next page because now Bonnie is still facing the left and going to the left, but she's made it past them. She is also on the left instead of being positioned over here. And this is something we talked about in that one Kuma and Akainu sequence a few chapters ago, where if someone who is facing left crosses past the other, then it conveys the feeling of them being past their opponents and no longer engaging with them on the page, just as it's true in world. Now, I also enjoy the sequence of this guy reacting to Bonnie's powers. It's something that seems simple, but if you were starting from the ground up and trying to think of how to convey the feeling of yourself dying that quickly goes away, using the visuals of seeing him externally as a skeleton to convey an internal feeling is a little bit clever. And the rhythm of these panels, the human, skeleton, human, conveys that it's just a flashing feeling, that it's something that he comes back from quickly. And of course, our eye going down with his leg here, as it also goes down to the next panel, matches the fact that he's moving down and falling backwards. Now, returning to Bonnie, our eye travels down directly in the direction her body is positioned in here. But this time she's back on the right of the page, even though she's still facing and moving to the left because we have a new obstacle for her. And the threat of this obstacle is conveyed by its size on the page, the fact that it occupies much more space on the panel than Bonnie gets to, and we even have a hint of the cliffhanger that's about to be resolved with the mysterious figure that appears to be on the pacifista's back. We resolve that page turn cliffhanger by seeing that it's a marine with a very weird devil fruit power to control what she's riding. And here we finally totally reverse the dynamic. Bonnie is now on the left. And this is because Bonnie is no longer the dominant force of this fight. She is no longer defining the terms of this fight. The opponent she's faced with is something that sadly she cannot handle. It's going to attack, and that's not something she really has a response to, and thus that attack is what we're moving with. This sequence also maintains the rhythm of who we're looking at. First we're facing the pacifista, then we're facing Bonnie, then we face the pacifista again, kind of zoomed in, although this was a larger shot, and then we face Bonnie again, very much zoomed in, and then we face the pacifista again. Now the way that this page directs your eye is also really cool, because once you read all of this and go over here, now these flashes of light are once again being used to direct your eye diagonally, and even then down to the speech bubble before we go down to Bonnie. Now this final panel is really cool, because our eye starts down here at Bonnie, goes up to the pacifista to follow its laser down with the explosion, but then once our eye gets here, we notice Sanji going this way. It's contrary to the right to left movement that our eye usually follows in manga, but it's using the fact that Sanji is shadowed, that he's blending in with all this shadowed stuff down here and he doesn't draw as much focus as the big explosion to make us see the explosion first before our eye moves right with him to convey the feeling of him dodging. There is one part of this panel I'm actually not sure how to interpret though, because our eye can also just start at Bonnie and go straight to Sanji dodging. And that does change the feeling of the panel a lot, because like I talked about, the order of things on the panel affects how fast they read. If we see the explosion first and then Sanji, it feels like Sanji barely got Bonnie away. But if we see Sanji first and then the explosion, then it feels like Sanji was well out of the way before the explosion hit. And it's not to say that either of those interpretations are wrong, but it's interesting to look at how much something like this can change how the story feels. Now, as Sanji has once again become the dominant force in this fight, now it's no longer this pacifista, we return to our characters moving from right to left. We also need to have this Sanji close-up because up until that point, it is a minor cliffhanger of who saved Bonnie. Sure, you can probably predict it, I mean Sanji loves saving women and we saw him earlier in the chapter going to help, but the story is still using the ambiguity of the dark shadowed silhouette before it confirms yes it was Sanji. This sequence also uses the way that Sanji is running to the left, but looking to the right, to have another surprise as somebody comes up from the direction he wasn't looking in. It's the same feeling we got earlier that we're being surrounded and attacked from all angles. I also really love this sequence as this marine once again attacks, just because, oh wow, our eye starts up here and then slams down with his impact. It's another great usage of how some motion should be from left to right if we're crossing from one row of panels to the next one. Now, I also wanted to talk a little bit about the Luffy and Kizaru fight, although there's not as much content for that as in some of the past chapters. We have another panel ellipsis as we cut from Bonnie's sequence to this fight, and we even have a nice big establishing shot that slowly zooms in on the action to really make sure we understand where this is happening and what it is. Here, our dynamic is actually that Luffy is on the left and Kizaru is on the right, which is a little unusual, but it makes sense in context, and it's very consistent between this panel and their close-ups. The reason for it is not, as in some situations it's been, that Kizaru is the dominant one attacking, but rather, it's all to set up this sequence where once again, we use the Z layout, because as our eye goes down here, our eye is moving in the direction that Kizaru and Luffy are moving in. Rather than Kizaru be on the right to show his dominance in this moment of the fight, it's being used to show him disengaging. Kizaru had to be on the right for this, because then we get to use the Z layout to show him moving away to the right, and the fact that this movement is occurring in the opposite direction that motion usually goes in helps convey the feeling of surprise that he would run away and disengage, that this isn't the normal way that we see characters fight. Now we also begin to set up the big reveal of this chapter on this next page. We really focus in on each character to show that all around the island, every person is reacting to the fact that something is happening. We have this very shadowed shot to hint at things, and then we have this nice big shot to hint at the whole summoning circle thing that's about to happen, and convey the feeling that what's about to happen is really something that matters on the scale of the entire island. But before we get to that stuff, I do want to talk a little more about the Luffy and Kizaru action, then we're going to focus it all on Saturn. The thing that I love about this action sequence is how well it sets up this circular motion. There's a lot going on here. We have great stretching from the background to the foreground. We have the foreground being dark and shadowed while the background is light, so our eye gets drawn by the contrast into this impact. We have this great curved line for our eye to follow as it comes down from here, moving with the attack. But the thing that's really cool is how it sets it up. Not only do we establish the wind-up with this spinning, and not only does this spinning establish the general concept of circular motion, but what's really cool is that we are essentially seeing a circle being completed. It's like we're getting one half of a circle like this, and in order to complete the feeling, in order to give us the thing that our brain is already anticipating when it sees this, we have to complete the other half of the circle. And we've essentially just taken those two halves of the circle, but separated them into two different panels. Up here, we get this half of the circle, and sure, our eye doesn't go all the way around like this to complete it. Our eye does go to this panel and then down here before completing it like this, but we still feel like one half has been given here, and then the other half that completes it is down here. And that is honestly one of the most clever ways I have seen a manga artist make a motion feel satisfying. Now it is finally time to talk about the character design that surprised all of us. I'm actually going to focus this part of the discussion less on paneling and more on the visual storytelling inherent to the design itself. There are going to be some moments of cool paneling here, but for the most part, I'm going to focus on the design itself. I think the first thing that a lot of people started to analyze about this design is the clouds around him, and these clouds are a great way to use the visual iconography inherent to a story like this to give us information. They are very reminiscent of the clouds that we tend to see around Gear 5. And Gear 5 being a god form then implies that this is the reverse of it because these are dark rather than light. And so already that gives us a lot of material to theorize that this is some kind of dark god or demon or devil. But the next thing I really like about this is the sheer black and white contrast. That's really not something we see a lot in One Piece designs, but it's very, very strong here. We have a very bright section in the center and a very dark section outside of this. Now, I'm not going to say that there's never ever been a design that looks like this, because I am not going through every single One Piece character design to make sure, but for the most part, One Piece characters are not designed this way. We don't have this clear white section inside this very thick black section. Now, there are a few things that this contrast accomplishes. For one thing, as the eye is drawn by contrast, designing him like this draws the eye into the middle. It draws the eye into his hands and his face, which are things that humans tend to use a lot in my experience. But it also just gives him a very different feel from most One Piece characters. Most One Piece characters just aren't shaded this way, and that's part of why he feels so otherworldly, so strange. It's why people are making crazy theories that this might not even be a devil fruit, but be some other kind of power. Now, the next thing I really like about this is the shapes that are used in the design. First of all, I don't know if this is just me, but spider-like shapes always feel evil to me. Maybe it's just the fact that I'm a little bit arachnophobic, but they freak me out. They feel very wrong, they feel very monstrous and very alien. And as an example of that, look at, I forget which number it is, but it's one of the angels from Evangelion. The angels in that series are always meant to seem wrong, to seem like they're from a different family of evolution than everything else on Earth. And I think that these shapes, these sharp angles that the legs go in, the fact that the legs go up so high above the rest of the body, I think are really used to convey that feeling. And I don't know if I can make a strong argument for it being intentional. Maybe it's just that I'm arachnophobic, but I think that the fact that a series that deliberately designed its monsters to feel wrong in this way uses this design element so strongly here helps me make that case. So going back to Saturn's design, we have all of these lines here really conveying a sense of monstrousness, a sense of wrongness. But at the same time, we have these very horizontal and vertical lines of his arms and his body. And these two very different kinds of lines help complement each other. In general, designs are going to be kind of boring if we all use the same kinds of lines throughout them. But then if we have contrasting shapes, if we have one type of line here and then other types of lines here, that makes the shape feel more interesting. It feels like there's some more variety. There's also the fact that, like the contrast between black and white, all of these lines are pointing you towards the center. It's always focusing your attention towards the important part of the design, and that's really cool. But the final thing that I think is cool about his design is the contrast not just between types of lines, but between elements of who he is. Consider, in the center, we have his hands, we have his arms, and we have his cane. We even have his beard too. Now, not only are these all human things, but the cane itself is kind of surreal here, because why would he need a cane? He is now a giant monster, and he now has all these monstrous legs supporting him. So it literally feels wrong for him to still be using a cane to hold himself up. And that's not a character design mistake, that's what makes it interesting, that's what tickles the mind and makes you think this is wrong and therefore that there's something going on here. It's sort of like when you see a design that obviously isn't obeying gravity at all. It's not a mistake, it's what makes it feel fantastical. And this contrast is being used to represent the two sides of him. On one hand, we have the center, we have these very horizontal and vertical lines that are representing the human side, the beard, the face, the hands, and the fact that he's an old man who needs a cane to hold himself up. But then on the outside, we have the very inhuman side, the monstrous body, the lines that are at very different angles to his arms and his cane, and even the horns. Essentially, it feels like the contrast inherent to who Saturn is as a person, this monstrous figure and the old man, is also being represented through the lines and shading of his design itself. And what I also really like is that we have him in basically the exact same pose here, and it's not a reused drawing. Look closely at them. Oda does not reuse drawings, he always draws things anew. But the key is that a pose is as much a part of a character design as the body and the outfit. Poses convey feeling, poses convey attitude, and this attitude is of a monstrous creature that at the same time has some of the wisdom and the patience of an old man holding a cane. So much of what sticks in our head about the character designs we see isn't just how they look, but it's how they hold themselves. And Oda knows that, and Oda makes sure to reinforce those images by drawing characters in the same pose so they stick in our head. Think back to some of the most iconic character designs that you've seen and think how much of what makes that iconic is just the way that they're standing. Obviously, this is a giant monster here, so it's a little more than just how he's standing, but I think it's being used here really well. And the final thing that I really like here is that we are again contrasting this harsh black and whiteness that feels so different from how most One Piece characters are designed, with the foreground where all of these people who normally might have some lighter shades in their design are shadowed. Obviously, it's not going to stick with this in literally every panel, but it's making sure that for our first impression of what Saturn's true form is, we are contrasting how he looks from how everyone else looks. So that's about it. I mean, there's more paneling stuff I could talk about aside from the visual storytelling in his design, like how Bonnie is moving from the right here and attacking him. Very cool, but for the most part, I want to leave it at that. And I'm glad I got this opportunity to talk about how character design is something where visual storytelling really matters, in a lot of subtle ways to do with the shapes and lines that are being used, because it's something that's just as interesting as paneling. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Feel free to like if you want to support me, subscribe if you want to see more videos, and comment if you want to shout at me about how I'm wrong about everything I said. I also have a Twitter account where I'm going to drop updates on new videos, and also just general musings about One Piece or other manga, so make sure to follow that if you're interested. Hope you have a good one. Bye.